Welcome to Inside Criminal Minds, a series of reviews for the titular series, Criminal Minds. If you're new to the channel, welcome, and look in the description for a playlist of all the previous episodes. And if you're returning, sit back, relax, as we profile and catch the Tommy Killer. So first we're going to fast forward past the first victim. We'll get back to her as she is the linchpin to solving this case. But more importantly, this scene is Reed's birthday party. And it shows the strengthening relationship between JJ and Reed. And for those of you who watch the series regularly, I do really wish Reed and JJ would have actually dated on the show because of their chemistry. And in this episode, we find out that JJ is the only person to call him Spence. But I digress. Next, the team is on the jet discussing the new case of the Tommy Killer and talk about the signature and the MO, which leads me to talk about the difference between MO, or modus operandi, and motive. MO is normally how the unsub chooses to kill their victim, and motive is why he kills. On this episode, they focus more on the MO more than they do the motive, and they talk about the MO being choking from a wire, busting up the riches, the appliances, and the china, and leaving a death ballad to basically mark his territory or give his signature. After the jet scene, we get to see the red herring for the episode stalking a lady in her courtyard, and fast forward to when the team arrives in the station. They don't exchange pleasantries with the cops, and in later episodes they begin to build rapport with local law enforcement. And this is where Gideon, while looking at different pictures of the victims, I look at his psyche because it seems like the job is starting to get to him. But meanwhile, Reed is dissecting the notes from the Tommy Killer and is interrupted by JJ in true Reed fashion, nervously tells her about the use of death in the Renaissance, making the conversation awkward. And then eventually the detective invites Morgan and Gideon to the scene of the recent attack, and Reed tells Hotchner that the ballad is incomplete because there is no betwixt, or the lady on the other end of the ballad. In the meantime, the red herring attacks a lady near the police HQ. This is when, while driving to the crime scene, Morgan and Gideon explain profiling to the detective, and also wondering how this unsub could be slipping past police cruisers after they increase the patrols. This is the first episode where Morgan plays the unsub to better understand the MO of the Tommy Killer and what he actually does in the house. And also, a side note, this episode uses the nickname of the unsub, and in future episodes they refrain from using the nickname as to not allow for the team to focus on meaningless details. Anyway, Gideon goes in the house through the front door while Morgan crawls through a window in the back, showing Morgan that the guy is a little bit athletic and cautious enough as to not be seen or heard from the victim. And again, while Gideon is in the house, I question Gideon's psyche, foreshadowing future episodes. And due to what was going on in the house, they realize that the Tommy Killer must have spent a lot of time in the house. At the same time, Hotch and Elle are interviewing the red herring's victim, and Elle is putting her at ease by removing the victim from the turmoil of bombarding questions of the police department and allowing her to calm down before Elle questions her, and discovering that the red herring, 1, got caught, 2, was wearing a mask, and 3, was African American, proving that he couldn't be the Tommy Killer. However, the arrest of the red herring proves very useful in the capture of the Tommy Killer due to the red herring being blamed for the Tommy Killer's crimes. And this is when Reed finds out that the ballad wasn't written in the first 3 murders, which leads Gideon to deduce that the Tommy Killer is narcissistic and wants to be famous, allowing him to use the red herring to make the Tommy Killer call the police department's headquarters. And unfortunately, the trap and trace doesn't work, but not before Agent Reed and Elle have a great scene.
You think it's weird that I knew that ballad?
I don't know how it is that you know half the things you know, but I'm glad you do.
Do you think it's why I can't get a date?
You ever ask anyone out?
No.
That's why you can't get a date.
However, now it is a race against time to find this unsub who blends in, which prompts a fantastic Morgan and Reed scene.
We're looking for a needle in a haystack.
Actually, it's more like we're looking for a needle in a pile of needles.
What?
A needle would stand out in a haystack.
And in this episode, we find out that Gideon is a fan of birds and doesn't really show up again until later episodes, but it does help Gideon figure out who this unsub is. And also it prompts Gideon to recheck the victim and how she was posed towards the power lines. This with the fact that they couldn't trap and trace the Tommy killer due to the call being rerouted through 25 different substations. They finally figure out that he is a phone tech, and also they figure out his name, which gets Reed and Morgan to the dispatch center in order to find who the Tommy killer is working with, leading them to the neighborhood of the next victim's house, where Gideon, Hotch, Elle, and all of the police department decide to scour the place looking for potential victims. This is where Gideon finds a screaming, crying baby and a tool belt, signifying that the Tommy killer is most likely in the house. So Gideon goes upstairs, and unfortunately for him, there was a creaking board underneath him to tip off his presence to the Tommy killer. But Gideon expertly talks down the Tommy killer and saves the victim by playing to the Tommy killer's need for fame and his narcissism. And in this episode, Gideon doesn't add the name of the potential victim and picture to a notebook that we later find out is one of his biggest motivations for staying in the game. And again, we find out that later in future episodes. And finally, with the Tommy killer apprehended, the team is on their flight back, and Gideon gives Reed a present to go and watch football with JJ. And finally, Reed beats Gideon in chess, signifying that Reed is maturing as an agent. This episode was great for establishing a budding relationship with Reed and JJ, also showing the great relationship between Reed and Morgan, and also this episode cements JJ as a team member being integral to catching the Tommy killer. Next week, an episode not focusing on a serial killer, but a kidnapper that tests the team in new ways. And as always, thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.